To the Let's Be Honest podcast, Chaos and Clarity in Education. This is the space where we move beyond surface-level conversations and get real about leadership and the systems, the decisions that shape outcomes for students and educators every single day. Today, our conversation's not just important, it's urgent. We're talking about principal supervision, leadership pipelines, and the realities surrounding the men of color and educational leadership. Mr. Harrison Peters, CEO of MCEL. Mr. Peters has led across multiple levels of education with a focused commitment to improving educational leaders. His work in principal development, leadership pipelines, and advancing men of color in leadership continues to shape critical conversations in our field.
Dr. Nash, I'm super excited to be here. Dr. Atkinson, super excited to be here. Thank you for having me today. And thank you for a no-nonsense, let's be honest show. It's about time someone had the courage to step out there and tell it like the old folks say it is.
It is about time. So
it.
What does MCEL mean, Mr. Peters? Let's start there.
Yeah, so MCEL affectionately means men of color in educational leadership. And we drew that through our work a long time ago, dating back to my time in Orange County with Johnny, where we met under a different name, but it evolved over the years. And it's just a response, like you and Dr. Nash are responding to a need in the ecosystem. We were also responding to a need as well. And that need is people who look like us are less than 2% of the market. We're leaving faster than any other demographic, and fewer of us are choosing education as a viable career option. So as a response to that need, we want to join forces with other like-minded individuals and organizations and stave off this impending extinction of male leaders, male educators of color in our space. So that's really the bottom line of the work that we do.
Man, brother said extinction. He said 2%. We are starting out real honest today. So let's ground us in the reality, Mr. Peters. The MCEL provocation suggests that based on current trends, right, we could reach an extinction, like you said, for men of color in educational leadership by 2030. Okay. Now, what does that statement mean to you? You said it before. Can you explain a little bit more?
Of course, it's a scary statement. And when you look at the work across the country, when you even just analyze educators of color, there are 40% of schools in the country, that have zero educators of color. When you look across the country, 90% of principals or 80% of principals are white. 90% of superintendents are white. Nearly 90% of school board members are white. Yet 50% plus students in the country are students of color. So that's an imbalance of the people who make policy decisions, who determine what books we read, where school boundaries are drawn. That's an imbalance of people in position and power and the students that they serve. And I want to be very clear, this is not like an anti-white movement or anything like that, but what we do believe that there needs to be a closer relationship with representation, because we also know the value that our kids see. So children thrive when they see people or see themselves in the people that serve them. And then before I sort of close this part, all of us have been principals. We know the value of having leaders of color in our schools. When we have principals of color in our schools, there's a higher level of community engagement. We staff students needing special ed services far less than our counterparts. Our most marginalized students, they feel safer. We recruit and retain teachers of color at a higher level. The data also suggests that reading and math scores are higher. And because we have Dr. Atkinson as a leader in our building, we also have access to gifted and talented programs, to AP and dual enrollment. So there is a qualitative argument and a quantitative argument why leaders of color matter. So we didn't do this work. We didn't launch this work because it felt right. We launched this work because it is a proven fact of the value add that educators of color bring to this space. And then my final point, Doc, it's not a zero-sum game. white students benefit greatly from a diverse educated workforce. So we're just making the case that the representation should be balanced with what students look like.
Love that. Love that.
So, Mr. Peters, how does principal supervision currently contribute to either strengthening or weakening the leadership pipeline for men of color?
Yeah, principal supervision is a really unique space. It is a powerful space that we've leaned into as an organization. Before I talk a little bit about principal supervision, I'd like to ground us in a few design principles around our work. First of all, we understand and we believe that the role of principal is the primary actor and a key lever in creating transformational outcomes. You'll never convince me that teachers don't matter. Teachers make the magic happen. And if you know anything about my leadership story, a teacher saved my life. The research and the data says the impact that principals have on learning, effective principals have on learning, outweighs that of teachers. But what that means is you have a leader in that building that's creating those conditions for teachers to make the magic happen. So now there is research that shows how important the role of the principal is. And I say that because principals don't get better by themselves, just like teachers don't get better by themselves. They need a coach, a developer, a supporter, a cheerleader to help them strengthen their skill sets. So that's two things. The next thing is there is irrefutable data that supports that a diverse educated workforce is good for all children. And I think one of the most important levers when we're talking about principal supervision doesn't rest with one person, an area superintendent. It rests with the central office that's creating a system of supports along with that principal supervisor to support that principal. And I think that's the opportunity that I see across the country is, yes, should we strengthen the principal supervisor role? Should we look at span of control? Should we make sure they can coach and develop and support principals? Yes. But you can't have a high-performing principal and a high-performing principal supervisor in the absence of a dysfunction or a functional central office. Now, you can have a high-performing principal. They won't last long. So the point that I'm trying to make is before we even have this conversation about principal supervision, we have to have this conversation around the critical alignment that happens in central office, which brings me to my last point is that principal supervision is one of the most under-leveraged and misunderstood levers in education. I like to say those are the people that have one foot in the streets and one foot in central office. They are closest to the problem or to the challenges or the opportunities, like our principals and our teachers. So at the end of the day, what a powerful position, what a powerful tool to have in your repertoire if you are a district and a central office. What that means for leaders of color is, as a principal supervisor, I'm in buildings. I'm visiting Dr. Nash. I'm visiting Dr. Atkinson. We're walking classrooms. We're looking at IoT meetings. And I'm also walking the hall with Dr. Nash and I'm looking over and I'm like, wow, oh, so Harrison is teaching 5th grade social studies. He's a male of color. Talk to me about how you are developing him for the next level. Or talk to me about his duty assignment, because we also know traditionally Harrison's duty assignment is going to be purely operational and purely disciplined. So that lens and that eye for that principal supervisor is absolutely critical in supporting principals, but it's also critical in supporting the work that we do in creating more opportunities for potential male leaders of color.
Wow. So the more you talk, the more I can liken MCEL to NAACP. So this is like the NAACP of education. But I'm calling you to be even more honest than you've been, because you've been pretty honest. And so let's do a self-reflection, an MCEL reflection, right? There are things that are outside of our control sometimes that actually lessen the number of men of color in educational leadership. But then there are also people among our ranks that help to lessen that number as well. So being a self-reflective leader, as Black men, how can we help ourselves to keep our position?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we've been left to our own devices for a long time. And that speaks to really quick burnout. And quite frankly, for us just leaving the system because we don't feel supported. We don't feel this sense of belonging. I'll go back to a point that I made earlier. By and large, when you look at Black men entering education, perhaps at the teacher level, we'll just say at the teacher level, overwhelmingly, if you backtrack their experiences, they are always pigeonholed or channeled or typecast into discipline operations role. That is not by design. I mean, that is by design. And I think it's because we typically have a very unique skill set. We do well with supporting our kids. We become that whisper on the grade level, send all the Harrisons to me. But what we don't get is that deep, rich experience that allows us to matriculate to the next level. And I'll use myself as an example. So I was an elementary teacher, and I was fortunate enough because I also taught core areas. But I also wasn't one of those teachers who was on the reading group. I wasn't on the school improvement plan team. I wasn't on the curriculum design team. I was the basketball coach. I was the after school guy. I was the timeout guy. And again, I did those things well, and thriving, healthy schools need those roles. But I sat in those roles and I was effective in those roles. And just because I was effective in those roles, I thought that I was equipped to go to the next level until I tried to go to the next level. So you walk into this interview and say, hey, I come to you with a great track record of being a teacher. You know, my teammates love me, my principals love me, I got great evaluation. I think that I'm ready to take the step to the next level. Until they start to ask you questions that you have zero experience about. So Harrison, we appreciate the experiences that you brought. Talk to us about what it looks like to sit in the PLC with a group of teachers, help them deconstruct meaning of a standard, align that standard to rigorous instruction, and ensure that there's an assessment throughout instruction at the end of the session that's commensurate to the level of rigor that we expect. And you're like, wait, I didn't do that. This is what I did. But if you want to move to that next level, you absolutely have to have that skill and the acumen. And that escapes a lot of our Black male leaders and Black male teachers because we're so pigeonholed and we're so focused on the operational duties and the discipline, and we miss that whole side of leadership. That's a systems flaw because they're also in a lot of systems that have these leadership pipelines. And then you don't have a lot of brothers in the pipeline. And it's because they can't pass the threshold or they can't pass the competencies. And it's not because they can't, it's because they haven't had the requisite experiences like their counterparts. We're not asking you to change the standards of the pipeline or the pool process. We're asking you to help us access it in a way by giving us the right skill set and experiences to build our skill. So fundamentally, all of that put on our back, plus we have to teach kids, plus we got to walk them home. We've got to be the neighborhood whisperer. As a Black male in education, you burn out real quick because there's so much more that you are expected to do and expected to be. And that's why we see this significant exodus out of the profession because it has become unsustainable. And this is not what I'm saying. This is what I'm hearing from brothers across the country.
And I've interviewed brothers who wanted to be assistant principals, but they're coming from a dean's position or physical education teacher position, but they don't have that instructional leadership under their belts. So like you said, pigeonholed, we're not going to get the opportunity in districts where they're now focusing more on instructional leadership.
We are seeing a decline in NAEP scores. We are seeing a decline in AP scores. So we know we have to rethink education and educators. And the skill set that we needed to get the results that we got back in the days, it's not the same skill set now. I mean, teachers have really difficult jobs. Leaders have really difficult jobs. And then we didn't have the challenges of COVID when I was teaching. There are so many things we didn't have that educators have to contend with now. Our students come to us with challenges, they come to us with opportunities, and we've got to be able to navigate that. So what's on the back of teachers and leaders today is much heavier than when we sat in the seat. And we just have to acknowledge that. Which brings me to your point, Dr. A, we also have to have a heightened skill set in this high time of need. And a lot of times, because we're dealing with the discipline, we're worn out. We don't get that exposure. And then it's over and beyond. The other piece is this livable wage. It's very difficult to take care of family on the teacher's salary. And that's another part, I think, of this cultural altruism that you have to think about, is being able to support a family. So there are many fronts and many indicators that talk about why this role isn't sustainable for Black male teachers. And then I think I read somewhere in your work, I often cite this work as well. There's a study out of Vanderbilt that if you're a Black male teacher, your evaluation is lower than your white counterpart. And that's even when you're equally credentialed, and even when your students score at or above the same level of your white counterpart students. So with all things being equal, why is my evaluation lower? Well, we could also surmise that there are strong biases in this work too, which is another force that we have to contend with. Just in the last 6 or 7 minutes, we have talked about so many forces that we have to contend with that our counterparts don't. And then you ask me, why do I not stay in the profession? And those are opportunities for us to begin to address at the system level.
So, Mr. Peters, it takes years to develop a principal. What should school districts do right now to accelerate and stabilize their pipeline?
Okay, so you're not going to like this, but I'm going to say it. So there are a lot of things we can do, and there are a lot of things that school districts are doing. Let me be very clear. And I'll point to the work out of the Wallace Foundation. So the Wallace Foundation is leading an equity-centered pipeline initiative. 8 urban school districts across the country have been on a 5-year journey to develop equity-centered pipeline, and they're doing amazing work. And I'm happy to share some of the 8 initial findings that they're finding from that work. When we look at the core of what you just asked, Mr. Nash, I go back to some fundamental things before we even get to the pipeline. First of all, teachers have to be cheerleaders of the profession. Teachers used to love teaching. And now I'm not sure that they have that same flair. So somehow we have to bring sexy back to teaching, because if I'm sitting in there with my kids all day and I have this love, this appreciation for my job, for the work that I do, it's going to exude. And I'm not saying this is a teacher's fault. I'm just saying the conditions don't exist for teachers to celebrate their roles. We just don't celebrate the roles of teachers anymore. So that's one thing that we have to do. The other piece is, and this is where I think fundamental shifts have to happen. Dr. Atkinson, if you want Harrison to graduate, go to college, and come back to teaching, you're going to have to change my experience as a Black male student. Like, you can't have me in a fraternity where I am the most suspended, the most put in the timeout room, the most kicked out of school, the most staff special ed. And then you want me to come back to that same institution and pour into something that it didn't pour into me. So fundamentally, we have to break some of those conditions that are keeping us, that are keeping our Black boys from being the best versions of themselves. That's the biggest piece. Why in the Tampa, Florida, would I want to come back to teaching when I didn't have a good experience? Those are 2 fundamental things that I think have to be fixed, and they're long-term, but they are foundational. The second piece, which I think is more closely to what you talked about and Dr. Nash talked, are these leadership pipelines. So first of all, I think school districts have to move in a way that the principal position matters. You can ask central offices all across the country, and they'll say, yeah, principals matter. Principals are important. But then when you start to look at the actual behavior, because it's not about what you say, it's about what you do. And it's interesting, and I won't put anybody on blast, but we were leading, we have this annual conference, the summit called Leaders Developing Leaders. And this is a summit that's focused on principal supervision and support. So we bring in principal supervisors all the way up to superintendents and their cabinets, basically central office. And we talk about, we learn about, we discuss, and we solve problems around how do we support principals. We also bring principals in to tell us how we're doing. So that's the backdrop of the summit. So last year we did an activity. It's a Four Corners activity. So basically we had a group of questions. So we, again, had central office in the room. We had high-performing principals in the room, and we simply asked a series of questions. One of the questions was, to what extent do you bring principals in your school district into the decision-making process? If you do it well, go to corner 1. If you do it okay, go to corner 2. If you need some work, corner 3. And if you're not hitting it out of the park, go to corner 4. This is a very interesting learning point for us, because when we started to share out, so we went to corner 1 and we had District A, and District A said, man, we do a really good job engaging principal's voice. We think we do a home run, but there's something that's wrong, because we, central office, we're standing in corner 1 saying we do a great job, but our high performing principal is standing over there in corner 4 saying you won't do shit. It was a very strong seminal moment for a central office to see the disconnect from what they think is happening in the field to principals who are actually impacted and what they're saying. So they were saying, heck yeah, we listen to principal's voice. Principal voice is critical, it matters. And then you got a group of principals say, no, y'all don't. We don't feel it. And I think that becomes the rub in this work. How do we bring people closest to the challenges, closest to the opportunities, to the table? When I was superintendent, I was really clear. I needed my central office. Central office matters. They play a very important role in this work. When it comes to really important decisions, I would never make a decision without having a group of principals around the table, because none of you have been in schools. And if you have, it's been a long time since you led school. We need to have the voice of the folks that are actually in the trenches. So bring me some teachers and bring me some principals and let's have a conversation. So I think that is one of the most important things about one of the most critical things that central office can do is elevate the voices of teachers and principals in a very meaningful way. Not just we have these monthly meetings with this group and we've got the teacher core and the principal committee. No. Really have their decision-making and their voices in the fabric of the decision-making of the district.
Let's add to the fact that perception is not reality. So many times the central office's perception is not the school-based reality, like you're saying. Love the fact that MCEL focuses on quality, quantity, and get this, care. Because as men of color, that is something that we could really, really do with. So let's talk about care. Why is healing and emotional support often overlooked in leadership development? What impact does that have?
About 4 years ago, we ran a large focus group across the country. So we visited small school districts, large school districts, urban, suburban, rural school districts. We talked to Black leaders, male, female, Hispanic, Asian, and we asked them a round of questions. We asked them, hey, when you see leaders of color successful, and you see leaders of color ascend to these positions of power and influence. Describe the leadership moves. How do they get there? Talk to us about how did you ascend to these positions of power and influence? And we collected all of that data. And then we hit them with the opposite. When leaders of color aren't successful, talk to us about the challenges, the systemic barriers, the unforced errors that we make, like all of those things. Like, what do you see? And we collected all of that data. And it's really interesting because it began to paint a picture. And I promise I'm going somewhere with this. So in the early 1940s, the Jewish community, actually in the 1900s, not the 1940s, in the early 1900s, the Jewish community had this book called the Jewish Vacation Guide. And they used this book to determine where they can go on vacation in the United States, because the US wasn't really kind to the Jewish community in the early 1900s. Well, fast forward about 40 years, a mail carrier from Harlan took this idea of the Jewish travel guide or the Jewish vacation guide and created the Negro travel guide, or the Green Book. And what this Green Book was essentially, what it essentially is, Black folks would take this Green Book and it would help them navigate as they travel the United States. So if I'm driving from Anne Arundel County to St. Louis, it's going to tell me these are safe routes that you can take. These are hotels that will allow Black folks to stay in. If you're hungry, these are restaurants you can eat at. If your car breaks down, these are car mechanics. So it's literally a survival guide for Black families and Black folks as they travel. And by the way, here's a list of towns that you need to be out of before the sun go down. So it was literally a book that we used to survive. Now, I go back to those focus groups. The data that we got from those focus groups pointed to this idea that Harrison, as leaders of color, there are things that we do just to survive in this space that our counterparts don't. So we actually took that data and created the Green Book of Leadership for leaders of color. We call it now the Representative Resilient Leadership Framework, but affectionately we call it the Green Book of Leadership. And in this guide, it talks about a leader of color navigating spaces that aren't kind to them. And it gives them competencies and strategies to navigate this space. The reason I say all of that is in response to your question, because after doing all of that, you are mentally, physically, emotionally, and psychologically exhausted navigating all these spaces, but yet you go on the battlefield every day. So we purposely stood up this idea of care in our theory of change as a response to that uniform that you put on every day, that other person that you have to become, that double consciousness that I think W.E.B. Du Bois talked about. It's exhausting. So how do we provide spaces and opportunities for our leaders of color to heal, to grow, to be in authentic spaces where they can say, I don't know, or I'm not doing well, or I'm concerned about my mental or my physical health, and not be judged? So we take the care piece really, really important, because you also know as brothers that we are also predisposed to high blood pressure and hypertension and diabetes and being overweight and heart attack. Johnny and I just lost a dear friend a week and a half ago from a massive heart attack. This work is difficult alone. Compounded with your identity and your gender as a male leader of color, having to shoulder more than most is real. And then my final piece, there's a study that talked about the average number hours per week that white, Hispanic, and Black teachers work. And everybody works hard. Everybody works, we know it's difficult. But there are levels to this, as the kids used to say. So white teachers work on average 40 to 45 hours per week. Hispanics, 45 to 50 hours per week. When it came to Black teachers, well over 50 hours per week. And that is because we are called to be so much more for our community. We can't just teach, cast it in, and go home. We're teaching, we're counseling, we're walking kids home, we're driving kids to practice, we're taking kids to church, we're taking kids to things on weekends, we're babysitting until their mom and dad to get out work. And this is not to say that our counterparts aren't doing it, but on average, it is pervasive in the Black teacher community. We're called to be so much. And our community doesn't expect us to cash it in at 2:30 or 4 o'clock when the bell rings. They expect, that is a weight that our counterparts don't carry. So we cannot ignore this physical, this emotional, this psychological burden, or this weight that we carry every day. That is why care is so important to MCEL, because you can't be your authentic self to anybody until you are whole to yourself. And we really, really lean into that, taking care of yourself.
Thank you, brother. First of all, sorry about your colleague that you mentioned that you both know.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Peters, could you share with us and our audience, what are some of the most effective strategies you've seen to increase the number of men of color in educational leadership?
Yeah, there's a lot happening. And I'll give you a little bit of what we do as MCEL. So we believe deeply in this idea of community. So the first thing we talk about is, how do we support leaders from day one? You just don't grow leaders 5 or 6 years into the role. You have to start identifying talent early. Not that you have to rip them out of the classroom and say you're going to be a leader, but the first thing we do is start exposing them to the real strong intricacies of the job. So can we not typecast them into discipline operation role? Can we have them on the literacy committee? Can we have them on the assessment and the school improvement? So expose them to a different side of the work to help sustain. The other piece is, as you have them doing all of these extra duties, pay them. I mean, I know the work is the work, and I know they're part of the work that we do it because of the goodness of our heart, but we also paying for our time. So they should be compensated for all these extra things. The other thing is having a mentor. Like, it's very important that you have a mentor to walk side by side in this job with you. And the reason I'm saying that, because when I was young, maybe early 70s or late 70s, the bald eagle in America was becoming extinct. Y'all probably too young to remember that. The bald eagle was becoming extinct. And I remember people.
I heard about it.
Yeah, you heard about it. Yeah, young man there. So what happened was, when folks got to the legislature, oh my God, the bald eagle is about to become extinct. There's only like 2 of them left. What literally happened was an ecosystem response. So we passed laws, we drafted policy, we invested money, we did all types of things to save this dying species, because this species was so valuable to the American culture. Well, if we have a species of male educators of color that is about to be extinct, we should have that same response. So giving them very clear access. When I say give, ensuring that they understand what it means to access the pipeline. Also, looking at them, we tend to typecast them into this vision of a leader. Leadership looks very different. And just because I don't have the acumen or the behaviors that you want me to have as a leader, that means, so who are the traditional and the non-traditional leaders? We also look at programs like Grow Your Own. We talked about a livable wage. One of the things that MCEL does is, when we find great male teachers of color that want to take that next step, we give them a mentor. We pay for them to go back and get their credentials, because who wants to go back and get their credentials and be riddled with student loan debt? So how can we also make it cost effective so that they don't get the degree and then spend the next 10, 20 years trying to pay off the doggone loan, because you also have families to take about. So we think about grow your own, we think about apprenticeships, we think about alternative paths to certification. I think the most important part is just don't go at it alone. You need a mentor and a coach to guide you through the process. So the way that we engage in this work is we do it in cohorts. We don't want brothers to do this work by themselves.
Don't go it alone. I like that. We do it together. So what role do allies, especially those in positions of power, play in dismantling the systemic barriers identified by MCEL? You spoke to some of them.
They own it. Quite frankly, they own it. A little bit of a story from one of our partners. So a few years ago, I got a call from a school district and a superintendent. And the superintendent, who happened to be a white leader, said, Harrison, I heard about MCEL. I'm at a pretty large school district, and I've got one black male leader. And we had to bring him out of retirement. And I just think that that's a problem. And I've got a large school district, and this is just not representative of the kids in the community that we're serving. Can you help us? And I said, I'm happy to help. MCEL is happy to help. How do you see us happening? How do you see us helping? And he said, well, we've identified these 10 or 12 black men that we think have a strong acumen. Can you come in and support us developing and growing them and getting them ready for the principalship? That's always a red flag to me. So I said, well, Sue, permit me to fly out, have a conversation with them. After we have a conversation with them, then I'd love to circle back with you. If you know, like I know, before I got on the plane and flew out, I already knew what I was going to hear. But anyway, got on the plane, flew out, went in there. Hey, brothers, I'm Harrison, been in the game for a long time. Your superintendent wants to pour into you. Your superintendent believes that you can be transformational leaders. And I'm curious, why don't y'all want to be leaders in this district? Then you get that conversation. Well, close the door and we'll tell you. So it became that truth telling moment. We don't want to be principals in this district because we saw how you treated the last black male principal. We don't want to be principals in the school district because you put us in the toughest schools and don't give us the resources and the support. We don't want to be principals in the school district because we get 3 years to turn the school around. Our white counterparts get 5 years. When we don't turn the school around, we get demoted. When they don't turn the school around, they get promoted to central office. So why in the world we want to be? And we knew that. That's been part of that playbook for years. But it gave me the license. And Dr. A, this is where I'm getting to the answer to your question. It gave me the license to go back to the superintendent and say, what you're doing, Sue, it's admirable, but it's borderline dangerous. It's dangerous because you want MCEL to come in and fix some men that are not broken. Your black and brown men aren't broken. It's the system that's broken. So when we talk about, when you ask me the question around what systems can do and what is those disconnect, what we want to be able to do is, yes, work with these black men because we need to get better. I don't want to send the message that we are where we need to be and we're perfect. No, we need to get better. But the system needs to get better. So can we look at your HR policies around how people access the pipeline? Can we look at your cabinet? And can we look at the conditions that you created in your school district to where leaders of color, do they feel seen? Do they feel appreciated? Do they feel heard? So there's a whole top-down audit that we need to do with central office before we can even get to the school site and the principals. And a lot of times what we do is we want to go directly to principals. We want to blame the principals. We want to shoulder the principal. And again, you got to have broad shoulders as a principal. It's a tough job. It's the job is the job. And I always tell people that. But there are things that we can do from a central office perspective for it not to feel that way. And that's where I think the missed opportunity is understanding the conditions that need to exist for leaders to thrive, because nobody becomes a principal because it's easy. Everybody knows it's a difficult job, but it's compounded when we don't have the levers of support, when we don't have the strength of principal supervision, we don't have a system of support that's built around us. That's why we're launching this national campaign, this national initiative called Who Has the Principal's Back? So over the next 5 years, all we want to do is flood the market with this idea of who has the principal's back. Are we elevating the principal role to the primary actor in the building? But the real part of the initiative is not really about the principal. It is, but it isn't. It's about central office. So most of our work is centered on redesigning central office, redesigning the principal supervisor role, hoping and helping that we can to bring alignment and coherence. There are some districts where there are 4 or 5 layers between the superintendent and the principal. The principal is the most important investment you could make as a superintendent. I talk to a lot of superintendents. The biggest decision that you can make is who you put in your school. Even if I'm in a school district with 300 schools, I have an impact. I can get 300 great principals. It's going to be very difficult to go out there and get 30,000 amazing teachers. But I can focus on getting a great principal in every building. That is your job. That is your role as a superintendent, to make sure you have an effective principal in every building. And they will in turn ensure that we have great and effective teachers in every classroom. And somehow we miss that. Somehow we don't make that connection. But it's all about impact and influence. Your impact and influence on building leaders. A lot of superintendents build these buffers between them and principals. And it's very difficult. It's counterintuitive, and principals feel it.
So, Mr. Peters, you initially alluded to the amount of hours that we work from day to day during the week. Our work is not a 7 to 3, it's not an 8 to 4, it's not a 9 to 5. We literally take this work home. So how do leaders, particularly men of color, navigate the emotional weight of the role while still showing up authentically and effectively every day?
Yeah, that's a trick question, Brother Nash. Showing up authentically and effectively. I would argue that in most spaces, we can't show up authentically. We'd like to, we want to, and we should be able to, and we can. And that's where a lot of the challenges, the consternation, the health, everything that you talked about comes into play, because we are forced to play this role. And I hear a lot of people say, well, I wouldn't work anywhere where I can be my authentic self. Well, most of us don't have that luxury. And I appreciate that. And I choose to see the world as it is and dream and work for a world that we believe can exist. The reality is, and if maybe it's just my lived experiences, most of our male leaders of color cannot show up as their authentic self. Systems aren't designed for them to do that. And because of that, you're always playing this jumping jack game. You're always playing this, how do I get in or fit in? You're always on guard. You're always trying to figure out, how is my gender impacting this space? How is my race impacting this space? And as if we're getting real about it, I'm 6'4", 250, and been this most of my life. But also most of my leadership career, I've had to contend with this fragility of, Harrison, I'm afraid of you, or you make me nervous, or I'm fearful of you. And that's not how we want to lead. That's not how we want people to perceive us. We don't want people to be afraid of us. So I cautioned myself, and I said, well, I look across the table and I said, well, listen, as your leader, the last thing I want you to do is fear me. I don't want to make you nervous, because if you're feeling that way, we can't do great things for children together. So as your leader, I need to adjust whatever I am doing to cause you to fear me. So what I would like for you to do is tell me, in those moments where you fear me, describe the behaviors so I can make sure that I don't exhibit those behaviors anymore. So when you fear me, tell me what those moments look like. And 100 times out of 100, they could never say, well, you yell, you curse, you get mad, you slam doors, because we know, first of all, through that playbook, we can't behave that way. So they could never name the behaviors, but it's this perception of being this big black guy. And I can't do anything about that. And that's not my problem. But I have to be knowledgeable. I have to be proximal to that because it is very, very real. And you and I know, all of us, all three of us have been building leaders, and they're just survival techniques that we've used to navigate those spaces. Don't close the door. Have your secretary. Don't yell. Like, there are just things that we have to be cognizant of that our counterparts are. And again, that's physically exhausting. Physically exhausting. And my last point is, I was in this doing some traveling not too long ago, and my job, my role that day was to talk to a group of legislators in this particular state. And these legislators were thinking about engaging in some educator diversity work. I want to describe to you how that day went. So I got dressed, walked outside the hotel, got my phone, got ready to call Uber, and I realized that the place that we were going to meet was right up the street, 3 blocks. So what I said to myself, I don't need to call an Uber. I can walk these 3 blocks. What I want to describe to you is how I engage with those 3 blocks versus my counterpart. So it was my first time in that space. I had never been in that city before. And I would argue, and I'm going to use a bias here, that if you're a white male and you were walking to that spot, you would be looking around like, wow, nice place. I've never been here, enjoying the scenery, trying to figure out what's going on and soaking it all in, and all of those things that you do as a first timer and a tourist. That wasn't my 3-block walk. My 3-block walk was literally, okay, when you get in there, Harrison, make sure you use the clean English. Don't talk too loud. Be careful not to use that loud country voice. Don't tower over those people because you know you 6'4". So I'm literally running through this playbook as I walk to the venue. By the time I get to the door, I'm already exhausted mentally. Just to run the playbook on how I survive in a group full of white legislators. This is the journey that our teachers and our leaders take. This is what systems have to be proximal and understanding around, that this is what we endure. And I share that story. I say, for me to get to this space and talk to you, I was literally exhausted mentally, and I haven't even spoken to anybody. This is our reality, and I need you to understand that that is the reality for your teachers and leaders. So to go back to your question, Dr. Nash, that is sort of the nexus that I think districts have, this nexus of opportunity and engaging their educators of color around how do we create these conditions where you feel seen, where you feel that you belong, where you feel as if you can thrive. That is hypercritical, which brings me back to my ultimate point that I've been making all night, is the role of central office in leading this work. We can't discount the importance and the critical nature of an aligned and coherent central office.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Harrison Peters, for being with us today. We really learned a lot about MCEL. Well, I did. I know Dr. Nash knew about it before. And your work is more than just transformation. It's transformation of systems, transformation of leadership development, transformation of outcomes for all students. I want to thank you for the work you're doing and you will continue to do. I'm looking forward to that national campaign, Who's Got the Principals Back?
Yep.
Well, we got you back, Mr. Peters. Thank you.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you guys. Thanks so much.